Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our baseball preseason webinar. My name is John Skees, and I'm the Director of Media for TAPS. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, but I've got some housekeeping items I want to discuss with you first. So, first things first, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email with a link to that recording as soon as it's ready. It should be later this afternoon. Second, if you have questions as we go through the presentation, please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar interface. In that little panel for GoToWebinar on the side of your screen, you're going to see one of those drop downs is questions. You can just type them in there and we can get those answered. We're going to try to answer those as we go through the presentation. We've got a few stopping points to play catch up, and then we've got a general Q&A at the end. So if we don't get to yours right away, don't worry, we'll probably catch it as we move through. But if your question is just too specific to answer appropriately in this venue, please send us an email at info@taps.biz, or if we run out of time, please send us an email, info@taps.biz, after the webinar, or call us at the office and we will get your question answered. Okay, I am joined today by Brian Bunselmeyer, the TAPS Executive Director, Robert Huckabee, TAPS Associate Director and Director of Compliance, and Steve Prudhomme, TAPS Associate Director. I'm connecting remotely, but Will Dixon is in the TAPS office, and he is helping us out in the conference room today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Thank you for joining us here today. We're glad to be able to say welcome to baseball 2021. We got close last year. We got started, but we weren't able to complete the season. We are looking forward to making it all the way through during these pandemic times. We've all got some protocols in place. May take a little finger crossing and a little social distancing, but hopefully we'll get to our championships in May. So again, thank you for joining us here today. We're trying to give you a high cover, high overview of what the baseball season will look like. And like John said, if you have questions, please make sure to reach out. If it becomes district specific or if we're too far in the weeds, we'll catch those later on. So Steve, kick us off this season and tell us about the TAPS dates for 2021.
Well, the upcoming dates we are more excited about than I can think of in many years to get back to baseball. Obviously, next week, next Monday, you'll start your first in-season practices on the 25th. First scrimmages, February 1st, we'll be able to start with games and tournaments. And yes, TAPS is allowing tournaments at this point. And then we get all the way through the season, and that's our plan. April 27th, you'll have your district certification, followed by the by-district certification, and then the championships will be May 12th through 15th, and we'll have more information coming. And on May 19th, I look forward to looking back on a great season and picking our all-state teams at that point. We'll be at the Belmead Civic Center, a little bit different, but that information will come later after a great season. Now let me hand it over to Robert, talk a little bit about rules and governance.
All right, thank you, Steve. Good morning to everyone. As we look at rules and governance for our sport of baseball, our TAPS rules, our basic rules, are found in sections 146 through 148 of the TAPS bylaws. If you're not too familiar with those, go to the TAPS website. At the very top, there's a tab called Resources. Just hover over that Resources tab. About the third or fourth item down is called Bylaws. Click on that. It'll go take you to a separate page. It'll pull up a Google Doc, give it a couple seconds to pull up, and then scroll down to section 146 through 148. Those are your basic baseball rules. We're going to go through a lot of those in more detail as we go through this webinar. One of the most important ones, though, is interscholastic competition, scrimmages, tournaments, and games. What are my limits? Those are in section 146. It's still in place. You have a maximum allowed of 22 games and 3 tournaments. And as Steve mentioned, yes, TAPS is allowing tournaments. Local control, your school administration's decision. That's whether you go and attend tournaments or whether you host tournaments yourself. We are allowing that at the TAPS level. Whether you do that and participate in that or not is local control up to your school's administration decision. We have no game limits per day or week restrictions. That's local control once again. Obviously, you know, with baseball and the nature of the game, there is practically a limit as to how much you can do in a day or in a week, but we don't regulate that. We leave that up to you. And then in the playoffs, as we move into that, a warm-up game would be allowed per each round of the playoffs. We still allow that. Brian, talk to us a little bit about section 138 and eligible opponents.
What we found so far during the football and the basketball, the soccer and the volleyball seasons, or games are getting canceled. Some schools can't find opponents, and we just wanted to take a quick step back here and help everybody remember these rules haven't changed. What these rules are who you can and who you can't play. They're found in section 138. So we're going to begin with school-based programs. You can play high school teams. You cannot play teams comprised of athletes from multiple schools. All three of our major areas, DFW, Houston, San Antonio, have at least one school or one team or two that are comprised of athletes from multiple schools that have gotten together. Either they didn't make their team or they're somehow on a homeschool-based team that's not really a homeschool team. So as you go through, make sure you know who you're playing. So no combined teams. You can't play junior high teams, and no college varsity or sub-varsity. We've been asked that question twice now in the last week or so. Can I go play somebody's, they're just starting a baseball program, or they've got a weaker JV or a freshman team and we'd like to play them. So that is not allowed. We're high school-based programs. Homeschool programs are only homeschool students. So if it's a homeschool group that is inviting students from local schools that don't have a baseball team or whatever, those would not be allowed because that's a combined team. Teams generally need to follow the eligibility guidelines for TAPS. We don't want to have 19, 20-year-olds out there playing against your students. And by the same token, we don't want to have sixth graders out there playing against your students. So when you're playing a homeschool school, make sure you talk to them about that it's high school students that you're looking to have. And those homeschool programs need to be playing in some type of a homeschool qualifying tournament or a homeschool program if they're not in another league, which would include things like THESA down in the San Antonio area, both Houston, whether it be the Brazos Valley Homeschool Group or whatever that are organized and recognized. Dallas and Fort Worth have those as well. If you're in another league, obviously we play a lot of games non-district wise against the UIL, the SPC, and TCAP. You'll notice there's a couple of leagues that may or not be up there. If you have questions or you have schools with those leagues, please give us a call. And then you're not allowed to play schools who left TAPS not in good standing. We still have 2 or 3 of those that broke the rules or those that didn't stand by the contract that they signed. If you've got questions, let us know. You cannot play club teams as a game. You cannot play select teams as a game. You cannot play independent teams, those teams that are not affiliated with any league. And there are several of those. A lot of those are your charter schools. If you have a question on that, please reach out. Those independent teams would also include teams that might be playing only for one activity in another league. They might be playing a football or a basketball only in a league. So independent teams are not allowed. And school members of a non-approved league, we've got a couple of leagues that they don't have the same vision, foresight, mission that we have. So those are not allowed. So if you've got questions on whether those opponents that you presently have on your schedule work out, let us know. I will tell you that there's a team in Spring that's a charter school that everybody wants to play. I think it's Spring Legacy Sports Sciences. They are not an approved team for TAP schools. In the San Antonio area, as an example, you would have a Cornerstone that is not an approved team. And then up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, those that are members of TCAL are not members as well. So just make sure you know who your schools and who your opponents are associated with and whether or not they're approved. You're playing them could jeopardize how many games you get to play next year if you're scheduling non-approved opponents. Steve, tell us just a little bit about what to do about out-of-state opponents, if you would, and kind of clarify that for us.
Yeah, first of all, an out-of-state opponent would be somebody you would travel out of state to play, or someone coming from out of state to play you, or if you're hosting a tournament, they're one of the ones that you need permission to invite. If you get caught in a tournament, that's going to be the host tournament, has to get them approved. Go to Rank 1 and your coach's toolkit, and you'll see out-of-state opponents form. You submit that form, send it into the office, and then once TAPS has approved that within the Rank 1 system, and then we'll follow up with the communication, then you're going to be clear. Again, these opponents need to be someone who's part of an association that's approved by National Federation of High Schools. And again, it's a very clean, a very easy process, but you do need to give us all the information required, and we'll work with you on that. Moving on to baseballs, we continue with Wilson. That is the required ball of TAPS. The TAPS, and it's the high school approved ball, the Wilson A1010 high school, and make sure that it's NOCSI certified, and that's a little bit new. So if you look on the 2020 at the bottom picture, you'll see it needs to have that marking on it to be official and to be safe. These are required for all games that you play, or where you give the ball out. Obviously, if you go to someone else's ballpark, they're in charge of the baseballs. But if it's your tournament, you're hosting the game, or it's a neutral site game where you're responsible, we use the Wilson baseball. Game information. This is critical. to keeping up with what's going on. And part of what we do, we establish eligibility for schools, for coaches, for students, and then we have to oversee the certification process of the districts and championships. It starts with the building blocks of games. So it's important that TAPS has your schedules in rank 1. They need to also be uploaded in ScoreStream, and these scores need to be reported. This is required. All schools are required to score report. Both teams need to go on, make sure that your score is properly put into the systems of rank 1 and of ScoreStream.
So ScoreStream is a fan-based app that we've adopted. So if you've got a manager, if you've got that team mom or that team dad, or you've got that person that really wants to be involved and goes to all your games, you don't have to do ScoreStream yourself. Obviously you can, but ScoreStream, you just assign it to somebody on your staff, on your fan base, or on one of your managers. Ask them to do that as you go along. It's also a great way to keep the scores out there inning by inning, or basically run by run, so to speak. So ScoreStream was recommended last year. It is required this year, but it is the least troublesome if you can find somebody to help walk you through doing that. And as we try to hype and as we try to get the information about our teams and our student athletes out there, the best thing you can do is help us get those scores out there. So again, make sure you get your schedules in and turn them public. Once you put your scores in, make sure you turn them in public and make sure you get them in ScoreStream.
Also, as an old athletic director and coach, sometimes parents are like toddlers. If you can keep them busy, they do well. So I like to give all my parents a job at the game, and it really helps things to go smoother. So again, that's an unofficial piece of advice. But moving on to the officials. These people, we don't have games unless we have umpires, and we need to make sure that we go about this in a very serious manner. If you look at section 134, TAPS approves all TASO chapters, and then also TAPS has approved chapters, and these are listed on the website. Make sure that when we say, there's a big difference saying I'm a TASO official or I'm with one of the approved chapters. This is not a patch on their arm. They need to be, as we say, TASO or approved chapter trained. They need to be a member, and they need to be assigned by that approved chapter. So again, this is not a patch on the arm or on the chest. This is something that has to be done all the way through the assignment. So make sure that you have that with your officials, that you're working with them, and you're communicating with them in this way. And I talked to the softball people last night, but the same thing, you must communicate.
So the important part about the TASO and the TAPS approved chapters is that they are in agreement with us as we are in agreement with them. If they have a disagreement with one of our schools, then we will help mediate that. If you as a school, as a coach, as an athletic department have a struggle with a particular official or a particular situation, then they will are open to mediation as well. So between us, we're going to work to make sure that if bad things happen, it works out. And obviously, we want the best trained folks we can get, and we also want that opportunity. So the big key there is that last one, TASO assigned. It needs to come through that assigner in your area or through the TAPS approved chapter assigned, not just someone who says, hey, I'm a member and I'll do it for $5 cheaper. I hate to say it, but that's always gotten us, is somebody's always willing to undercut the official pay scale. Those pay scales are located on the TAPS website. If you go to taps.biz, go over to resources, click on officials, and then jump down and click on the baseball chapter fees. You'll know exactly what we've agreed with TASO and our approved chapters to pay.
Yeah, and we also suggest that you sign a contract, get a contract, an agreement with your chapter on how things are going to work that year. Make sure you have the pay scale on there and follow through. And again, we will follow up, make sure everybody's following that contract in the proper way, and we're here to help support that and support you in working with the local officials. Now moving on to the NFHS rules, and Robert Huckabee.
All right, thank you, Steve. Before we transition to that, we've got a question here. It's a good question. It's on topic here. Do we still allow to substitute 2 games for a tournament? In that game limit formula that's in 146, those rules are all still in effect. So you have a maximum of 22 games in 3 tournaments, and you can swap 2 games for a tournament. So you could have, for example, 20 games in 4 tournaments. You could do that. So all those rules are still in effect. As Brian mentioned earlier, none of that changed. So if you have questions about that, jump to 146, go through there. If you still have a question that doesn't answer your question, you can always reach out to us here in the office. The NFHS, the National Federation of High School Rules, are our official rules for baseball, and those are contained in their rule book. That you can find that at nfhs.org. Okay, you can buy the rule book. Okay, more importantly, what we use here in the office, we've done it for several years, a great tool. We have those rule books on our phone. They have an app. You can go on there. You can purchase just baseball. You can purchase all the various sports and things you want. You can have a complete copy of the NFHS baseball rules on your phone, readily accessible. Steve and I have these and use them all the time. I think it's only like $10 or something like that.
Yeah, and they also have a case book that you can use, which is very, very helpful and helps you to understand the rules, and the officials look at that as well.
You always have situations that arise. It doesn't hurt to have that thing readily accessible. You might have forgotten to throw it in your bag if you have a hard copy, but if you've got your phone, we know everybody has their phone everywhere they go nowadays. That's a great tool to have. So look into doing that if you aren't already. That's a great tool. NFHS Changes for 2020, 2021. There were none for this year. We basically stayed with the changes that were made last year. We've got several noted on here that I'll just run through the topics. We're not going to go to those in great detail. Hopefully last year, as you started your season and unfortunately weren't able to finish, hopefully you were already familiar with these. But if not, because of how things were interrupted, make sure to go to the NFHS, look at those changes. The points of emphasis for last year continue forward to this year. One regards the rules for a designated hitter. If you have one or not, how that's handled. There's 2 or 3 ways to do that. Make sure you're familiar with that rule. We've got that slide up here, but we're not going to read through that. Just make sure you know how designated hitter is handled if you're using one in your game. The next one is proper pitching position. These are some rules about where the pitcher should and can properly place their feet, depending on which particular windup or set they're using. So be familiar with that and make sure you know, and visit with the officials before the game as always. If there are any questions or concerns, if something has come up in a previous game, just make sure to address that up front so that everybody's on the same page. Here's a forced play slide rule. That one's pretty simple. I think you should be familiar with that. The next one is about jewelry. We actually have, I handle all the ejections that come through the office, unfortunately, every year, and we end up having 1 or 2 a year because warnings have been issued and then somebody's still wearing jewelry and they get removed from the contest. So make sure you're familiar with that, and that's obviously a safety issue. Game ball, we mentioned that earlier. Steve went through that in great detail. It does have to have that NOXI seal, that certification on there. That actually went into effect last year. And you may not have run across it very much because we didn't get many games in, but that is still in effect. Another big one that came into effect last year, this next one, the Louisville Slugger Metabat is not certified. It was decertified. If you have any questions about that, reach out, but that one was taken out of play last year. And just make sure all of your bats, go through there and make sure. We know a lot of players have their own bats nowadays. We've had teams show up at the Final Four with 4 or 5 bats, and we've had teams show up with 40 or 50 bats. Just make sure they're all certified, make sure they're all in good condition, make sure they meet all the requirements. We don't want bad issues when we get in the 6th or 7th inning and somebody hits a go-ahead score and all of a sudden something's said about the bat and we've got a big controversy. We want to avoid that if we can.
So I guess, Robert, one of the things I would just recap, make sure all of your equipment meets the standards that are presented by the National Federation of High Schools and the rule book. That's bats, that's balls, that's batting helmet, that's catcher's equipment. Make sure everything we own is up to par. And that's your job as a coach. That's your job as a head coach to certify that all of your players' equipment is proper in there. The other thing that I would highly encourage you is go back through there as you read these rules. The number one thing, Robert, you mentioned that you handle the majority of the ejections or removal from a contest. I would say that the vast majority across all sports is because of the one piece of equipment the coach or the player has the ultimate control of, which is their mouth. So what you say is important and how you say it is important. So I just encourage you, be professional in how you treat folks, be professional, especially when you're dealing with the officials so that you can stay on the field to play.
And we officially request the officials to be very strict on profanity. So again, just make that not part of your culture and you're going to be okay. But again, that's something that'll get you run pretty quick.
All right, moving along. TAPS rules, as we've mentioned earlier, remember those TAPS rules can be found in 146 through 148. That should answer most all questions you have about our TAPS rules that apply to baseball. Go there, but if that doesn't answer your question, always reach out to us. Last thing we'll cover with regard to rules in this section is the pitch count. The pitch count rules have been in effect for several years now. Those are contained specifically. They're so important they have their own section. They're in section 148. You can go there and read those. There's a table there. There's a chart there that shows you based on how many pitches you pitched in a particular day or game, what you're allowed to pitch, if you're required to have days of rest, how many. Be sure to follow those. And we will have information out before games are played about tracking those just like we've done in the past. Brian?
So Robert, just a quick recap. How do they find the TAPS bylaws to be able to get to section 148, 138? So as I'm a coach, I'm looking on the TAPS website, what am I going to do to find those rules and bylaws?
All right, so you'll go to the TAPS website, taps.biz, homepage. You'll see up at the top. Is Will going to jump there right quick? There we go, Will. Great. All right, so up on the right, you'll see that resources tab. If you just hover over that and go down to bylaws, if you click on that, okay, it'll take a few seconds, but it'll pull up a big Google Doc, which is our Constitution and bylaws. Give it a second to load, and you'll see on the left-hand side, there we go, the table of contents popped up. They're in order by section number. We go all the way down. Those are our general rules on membership and eligibility. We go all the way down to 146 through 148. There's 148 pitch count rules. There's a description of the purpose and the basic details of the rule. If you scroll down just a little, Will, you'll see that pitch count table there. It tells you based on the number of pitches, how many days of rest are required. It also, and we won't go into this in detail, but it also talks about a tournament or series. That is described there in terms of what constitutes a tournament or series, and then how you calculate days of rest based on number of pitches in that tournament or series of games. We do get several questions about this throughout the year. We encourage that. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. We can help you walk through that one.
And again, the pitch count, you're going to go to www.taps.biz, click on athletics, click on baseball, and then there's the pitch count reporting button. You'll hit there. You do need to report those after every high school contest, whether it be varsity or sub-varsity. So it is a requirement. Don't make us be calling you. You make sure you get them in. It's important for not only you to record them, but it's also important for your opponents to be able to see as well. So when you go to baseball page, you'll see where we say in green pitch count worksheet. That's what for you to use at your site. That's a PDF. The pitch count reporting form is where you report. And then the pitch count report is where that report then generates everybody that's pitched that day or the days previously. And that's an ongoing table. So Robert, pitch counts obviously got its own section in the handbook. We consider it to be important, and we appreciate everybody's help in keeping that accurate and up to date.
All right, let's shift gears to eligibility. This is also a very important part of your role as a baseball coach and or AD. We need the eligibility of all of our staff and all of our students in our Rank 1 database. Rank 1 is our database for all of that information. Make sure that all of first your coaches, all of your staff, all of your high school coaches, and that's anybody that's working with your kids. That's head coach, assistant coach, batting coach, pitching coach, a dad that comes down and acts in the role as a coach and is assisting and working with your players. They are a coach under our definition, which is contained in section 1 of the bylaws. So if you have any questions about that, if they're working with your kids, they're a coach for our purposes, and they need to be in Rank 1 and noted as such. You create their coach profile, complete all their pertinent information, and then they also need to complete their scope requirements and their professional acknowledgement of rules. All that needs to be done and in place in Rank 1. Rank 1 has the ability to show when you log on, if you're in the system, if you're compliant or not. Your compliance is determined based on your roles at the school. So if you're listed as an AD, you have certain requirements within scope. If you're listed as multiple coaches, you have requirements within those sports. All that is done automatically by Rank 1. All you have to do is log in, and if you've completed all that successfully, you will be shown in compliance. Steve?
A consistent problem we've had is once people get into Rank 1 for one job, they don't go back and put the other jobs that they're in. So please put yourself down for everything that you are inside of Rank 1. That'll also help us when it comes time to send out emails or make contact with you.
All your students need to be in rank 1 as well. All your students are in rank 1. Once they're in there, they either create a profile if they're a new student, or they update their profile each year. Their parents log on and do that in the rank 1 system, and the parents and the students each year have to sign their acknowledgement of rules. That's all done online now in the rank 1 system. It's pretty easy to do. We also require medical information, a medical history, and physical is required to participate in baseball. That has to be in the rank 1 system. And then any school-based forms you might require at your school. You might require permission forms or travel forms or something similar to that. If you require that and you've included that in your rank 1 required forms, then once all that is done, there is a system that lets you know if those students are good to go or not. If a student is new to the school, for instance, they've transferred in this year, or at the beginning of this year, they're in high school, that transfer process needs to be completed as well, and that's done through rank 1. Let's jump on to student rosters in rank 1. This is very, very important. Steve will hit on communication and other things here in a minute, but what you need to do, if you haven't already in rank 1, you need to create a baseball team. And there's a simple process. They have great tutorials on there that show you how to do that. You can reach out to Rhonda or Kelly in our office. They're the ones that generally answer the phone. They're well familiar with this, and they can help walk you through it. You need to create a baseball team. You need to build your roster. You just pull up your list of students. You pull them over to the baseball roster, and it populates over there. And the minute they populate, they're either going to be red or green. If they're red, that means they're missing some form required in rank 1. That could be the acknowledgement of rules. That could be a medical, history, or physical. It could be the transfer form is not complete. Based on how they've answered the questions in that profile, rank 1 determines what forms are needed. And if something is missing, then they'll be red. Once everything is good, then they are green. And if you have any questions about rank 1, reach out to us. We can help you walk through that. Like every system, sometimes somebody's red and they should be green, or vice versa. And if you suspect something's not right on your end, reach out. We can help you walk through that. We'll even get rank 1 involved and figure out what the problem is and make sure all your students are eligible and good to go. Before they participate in competition, they should be on a roster. They should be green. They should be good to go. That's for your protection and for our protection as well, making sure that everything has been done. All right, Brian, do we have a couple of questions here?
Let's jump over here and catch. We've got 3 or 4 folks that have come up. We've kind of skipped over, but that's good. Can you finish the hitter once you reach a threshold? Yes, you can finish the hitter, but then you're done. So if you go in and you hit your max or whatever on that hitter, you can finish until that hitter's done. Once that hitter's done, you're done. So make sure that you understand that. And that is especially true for the max. However, once you hit a threshold, one of the lower thresholds, if you continue to throw and you go above that threshold in that hitter, you've gone above that threshold. So the only time that you're allowed to finish the hitter and it really not count against you, Robert, is when it's the max number of pitches. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So if it's a lower threshold, whether you're going to have to sit 1 day or 2 day or whatever, and you continue to go through that threshold, it does count. Every pitch counts. So only the max allows you to continue to finish that without a penalty. So the pitching thresholds are there. Please make sure that you look at them, you know them. Now, the situation becomes, it's up to the coaches, not to the umpire at that point. So it's our coaches that are going to be the ones that are following up on that. And whether if you do break those thresholds and you do go over, if you pitch somebody more than the max, if it's a pitch count problem, it's going to be dealing with the TAPS office, not the umpire and not the other team at the site. One last question. It had to do about catcher's mask, 1-piece, 2-piece. The bigger thing there is read the National Federation of High School rule book. So I'm not going to answer that. TAPS does not have a rule independent of National Federation on any equipment. So make sure that you download, as Robert said, either download the digital copy or you purchase the hard copy of the National Federation of State High School Association rule book, NFHS.org. And that'll catch us up on the questions, and away we'll go, gentlemen.
Okay, moving on to communication. TAPS has several channels of communication that we use. Number one, the website. And like I said, when I was an athletic director, I was told you need to go to that website every day and check. So make sure that you're checking in on the website, the baseball page. which Brian showed a little bit earlier. There's a baseball blog that's going to be there as well. And you can always go back and see all the different announcements that have been made. So make that part of your routine to go to the website. Also, emails will be sent to those people in rank 1 who are marked as a baseball coach. If you're a basketball coach and you don't mark baseball, you won't get them. So make sure you have the proper email in rank 1. We'll have emails going out, mass emails going out through that system. Also, we'll have push notifications to rank 1 that we'll use sometimes, especially times when it's a little bit of an emergency. Also, social media. We have our Twitter, and not just TAPS, but TAPS Baseball. So at TAPS Baseball, and again, we use the Twitter quite a bit, especially when we're in and around big events, especially the championships. TAPS website, make sure that you're familiar with it. We've been through that a little bit earlier, so we won't go through that again. The baseball page, we've hit that already. And now we move on to health and safety protocols, and I'll throw it back to Robert.
All right, Steve, thank you. We're just going to bounce through some of the highlights on health and safety protocols. Obviously, this last year and then moving into this academic year, COVID became the #1 priority in that respect. COVID-19 requirements. One of the first things is COVID-19 communication. As you look to move into scrimmages and tournaments and games, just like we've done with all of our other sports this year, there is a requirement. TAPS has a requirement of a pregame communication. This is required for all contests that are between 2 TAPS schools, that's being hosted by a TAPS school, where you're participating in a tournament. What you are required to do is to communicate to the other team. And basically what you're communicating is that we're healthy, we're good, we're not actively having any COVID, we're symptom free. All the coaches, players, managers, trainers, anybody coming to that game on that day, you're saying I'm good to go, and the other team is saying we're good to go as well. We'll go into what's required here in just a few minutes in another slide. If you're the home team, your responsibility is to affirm to the visitors that we're all good to go, we're healthy and COVID free. You also are responsible because you are securing the umpires to make sure that they as well are affirming that. What we want to do before we begin the game is make sure that both teams, the officials, everybody involved is communicating and affirming to each other, we are healthy, we are good to go, we are not having issues on the day that we're playing this game. So that's your requirement. We do have some sample forms that we produced at the beginning of the school year. They're in our original protocols, which are on the website, the Return to 20 protocols. And if you don't have yours already, you haven't been used to using those this year, reach out to us. We can get you a copy of that, and it is helpful. What is that pregame affirmation? Well, what you are doing is all of your players, all your coaches, everybody involved, they are self-screening, and they are affirming that at a minimum. Okay, they do not have the COVID symptoms. They're not lab confirmed with COVID, nor have they had close contact with an individual who is lab confirmed with COVID-19. That is your basic affirmation. I don't have it, I don't have the symptoms, and I haven't recently been in close contact with somebody who has. We followed that and required that throughout the year, even in the championships we have hosted, and it has worked very well. As we look at health and safety, specific COVID changes specific to baseball, how does it impact my program? Some things you need to keep in mind, that your practice time, your protocols, a lot of things that you do will be controlled by your local school administration. So how much you practice, those things you have in place, the protocols we put in place at the beginning of the year require your school to have your protocols in place. That's for sanitation of your equipment, your playing areas, your bench areas, all those kind of things. How you handle if there is a positive at your school or within your program, how you handle close contact description and definition, how you handle if you're going to quarantine certain people or your whole team, all those things are up to your local control and your school administration, and should be consistent with how you're doing everything else at your school. As you can imagine, we've had many questions about this throughout the school year. Well, what do I do about this situation, this sport, this particular group of athletes? And our first answer is, what are your local protocols? How are you handling things that happen at your school? So all these rules apply to any contest that you are hosting as a member school or any contest between two TAPS schools. Obviously, you may go to a tournament that's hosted by somebody else. They might not be a TAPS school, but you need to follow your protocols in those situations. That includes tournaments. If you're hosting a tournament, you need to follow those protocols that we have in place and your local protocols as well. That would include a tournament or a showcase or however those things are defined and however you're participating in those. When we look at contests and we look at pregame protocols, let's look at the playing area. Will, hop on down to that next one. Once again, you are in keeping with your local school protocols. So your bench area needs to be socially distanced as best you can. We understand there's a size and a space limitation there based on the number of players you have. Do the best you can in that area. Keep it clean and disinfected, and follow your school protocols that you have in place for everything else you're doing. Brian?
Robert, one of the things we've seen in the other sports, especially those that have a bench, is anyone that's in that bench area, if you do get a positive case, they're all considered close contact. So one of the big things that we're looking at and that we need you to look at is this is probably not the year to have extra players that are not going to see the field in the dugout. So yes, you can have additional players. Yes, you can have reserves. This is probably not the time that you want to have the whole JV sit with the whole varsity. Because in that situation, if you had a JV player pop up that came up positive, by virtue of being in contact in a close proximity of a dugout, you might have to sit the whole team. So again, we understand a lot of people want to bring a lot of folks. This is probably the year to really restrict who's in your dugout and who's in the field of play. And when we talk about the playing area, just like in the football, the soccer, et cetera, make sure that you're not having parents or other than the teams on the playing area. This is trainers, et cetera. Those are actively involved in the game, come between the fences. Everybody else needs to stay away.
All right, thank you, Brian. Officials pregame meeting. Pregame meeting, one coach from each team. Historically, that's how it's been done, but let's stick with that this year. Social distancing required and face masks are required during the pregame meeting. We're going to move into some specific requirements in just a second. Brian's going to do that, but one more on player introductions and pregame ceremonies. Some of you may have done introductions at your home games. You line up, you shake hands, you fist bump the officials, you maybe do something with the opposing coach. I know other sports do similar things. Let's stay away from that for now. If you're going to do introductions, just line up on your side, stay on your side. Let's have no interaction during the pregame with the officials, no contact, no handshake, fist bumps or anything with the officials or the other team. Players' huddles are discouraged as best you can. And then obviously you'll have your prayer and national anthem and move on into personal protective equipment. That's our next slide, and Brian's going to pick us up there.
We're going to take a brief pause here. Our email is info, I-N-F-O, @taps.biz, info@taps.biz. So as you go along, if you have questions after we get out of here as well, please feel free to email us there or give us a call at the TAPS office. We'll give you that information later on. I want to encourage each of you that's a coach, each school that's going to participate in baseball, softball, as we go through the personal protective equipment. I know that you've seen others in sports before you. Maybe they've really paid attention to personal protective equipment. Maybe they haven't. Maybe your opponents have. Maybe they haven't. Whatever you're watching in the major leagues or whatever, and how they perform and how they do things. Remember that we are coaches of high school age kids. They're 14 to 18 or 19 years old. They have a life outside of where you are. So the chances of them picking up something outside of school or your program is probably greater than in it, but you need to do your part. The other part when we talk about personal protective equipment is our baseball and softball coaches were our team sports that lost the opportunity for a championship last year. So as we look forward to the championships this year, we're going to start off with some pretty restrictive opportunities. And then if we can reduce due to the pandemic protocols and metrics, we will. So face coverings are required for assistant coaches when you're on the base coaching, for managers, scorebook if they're on the bench, athletic trainers when they're on the bench, players when they're on the bench, players when they're entering or leaving the facility before and after the game. It says table crew, just think of that as your scoreboard, whoever's doing that opportunity for you. Head coaches, when you are in the dugout or at the entrance to the dugout or whatever, if you're yelling to your folks and yelling instruction, we highly recommend you have a mask, but it is not required there. The officials we are recommending, but that's between TASO and the TAPS approved chapters and what they're going to do. And then the local control is for your team only. We have several teams that are going to make their players and coaches wear masks at all times. And that is definitely your right as a school and as a team. If you choose to have all of your players, all of your coaches, all of your team personnel wear a mask when in the field and when in the dugout and when at bat, you certainly are allowed to do that. However, you cannot require that of your opponent. So what you have is the opportunity to determine what your players and coaches will do. The other team will determine what they're going to do. So again, if you're a coach, if you're a head coach, assistant coach, baseball coach, you're out there other than a head coach when you're in the dugout and giving instruction, you need to have your mask on. Obviously, our schools can require that as well. Remember that as a head coach, if you don't have your mask on and someone tests positive for COVID in your dugout when you don't have it, you could be considered close contact depending on your protocols. Game balls, like every game ball we've had this year, just sanitize them the best you can, especially between innings, wipe them down. Obviously, you don't want a wet ball, so whatever sanitizer you use needs to be fast acting and fast drying. Sanitize your hands seems to be the CDC's big thing. Make sure you sanitize your hands whenever you can. So I think that's especially true in the dugouts after contact, whatever. Make sure that hands get sanitized when you can. Post game, we're going to do the same thing post game that we did pre-game, which means we're not going to jump out there. We're not going to have handshake lines. We're not going to do fist bumps. If you are out post game, you do need to have your face mask on and practice social distancing. So again, no post game opportunity between the two teams. Don't care if you stand up and wave. They did that a lot in football, but make sure we do that as well. One thing that has come up is what are we going to do? Are we going to allow? We just hit a home run as our tradition here at our school. The whole team runs out and meets them at home plate when they come in. We're highly discouraging that at this point. TASO is highly discouraging that point because at that point you are around the other team and you are around the umpire. So we would prefer, especially as we get started, those celebrations of a home run, those celebrations, and we also are even at the dugout mouth, we're highly encouraging those not to occur. So big groups where people are together, we're trying to say don't do it if you can possibly get by with it. Steve, we're going to jump on down to talk about travel and some other things and how COVID is related in that.
Yes, we get a lot of questions about what's the TAPS rules on the buses? Do we have to skip seats or can we go in vans? That travel is left up to local control. So whatever your school is telling you with regards to the parents taking them, how many buses do you take? Again, look to your school, make sure you're on the same page and go forward with that. But again, that's local control. Now fans, the fans have a few rules. The capacity limits being set by TAPS is the maximum percentage as set and published, and we will have that. Right now it's at 50%. That could go down, that could go up. If you wish to have a lower percentage than that, that is fine. So if you're say we're going to do 25%, TAPS said 50, there's no problem with that. Local authorities may be more strict in this requirement than TAPS, and that requirement should be followed. So make sure that you stay up to date, be on the same page as your athletic director, your head of school, and be consistent across the board. Now, this is one that's been a little bit, there seems to be some confusion. There isn't confusion. Fans must wear face coverings when they are entering the facility, and they need it when they're leaving, when they are not socially distanced, at least 6 feet. So a good rule of thumb, let's make that 12 feet away from everybody else. Stay apart if you're not going to have a mask on. And then moving throughout the crowd and the common areas at the restroom and all that, please wear a mask.
I think an even easier way is tell your fans to wear a mask. If they come into the facility, wear a mask. It's a whole lot easier to say that than for you to have to govern it. The other thing that's going on with fans, and Robert, Steve, one of you picked this up. How are we dealing with, I am the host school, I allow my fans, I don't allow the visitor, or I allow visitors. Robert, kind of what's our rule of thumb there?
What we've done in this, and it started back in volleyball and football in the fall, and what we've told people, and they understand it when we explain it this way. As a school, you can determine we are not allowing fans at our contest. You are allowed to do that. You can play your games without fans. If you do that, you cannot allow any fans at all. You could not have a rule that says well, we're okay with our people, but we're not okay with your people. So we'll allow our fans, but we're not allowing any of your fans. You cannot do that. And also, when we look at the restrictions we have on capacity, 50%, look at that from a perspective of accommodating the visitors at the same level that you're accommodating your own fans. So it's a look at it from a perspective of, let's stay within the limits, but let's be equally fair to both sets of fans. If we're going to say, I'm only allowing, let's say you're only allowing 100 fans total, okay? Be fair, communicate with the other school. Coach, how many are you going to bring? How many fans normally come to your game? Well, we bring 70 or 80. Well, you know what? I've only got 50 for you and 50 for me. So it's going to have to be 50-50. Or you know what? We only bring about 10 or 15. Okay, great. Then you bring yours and we'll get to that 100 limit. We'll stop there, and I might have more than you, but that's okay if they've had the opportunity to bring what they like to bring within those limits. Communicate with the other schools. What's required at your school and how that's going to be administered, because you don't want to be dealing with that on game day. You don't want the other set of fans to travel and drive over there and not know clearly what the expectations and the protocols are.
I think this year is the year that's going to highlight the need for game administrators at baseball and softball, especially as we move into the spring. Not only do you have the fans that you're responsible for and their general action, you've got what goes on in the field. You're there to assist the officials, the umpires, if they need help. But especially in this COVID is a responsibility, and enforcement is responsibility of the game administrators. And I know that especially at our sub-varsity games, but all high school level games hosted by TAP schools are required to have a game administrator there. So if that's something you've been a little lax on in the past, step it up, find that next person, next man up, next lady up to be your game administrator at all games that are hosted by TAP schools. And if you've got questions on that, or your game administrators have questions, please let us know. Steve?
Yeah. And also the key is to make sure that your district is all on the same page with how y'all are going to approach fans at the various sites. That's a key. Also, we found that online ticketing has been a godsend for us. That way you're able to make sure that you're going to be able to get into the game, who's going to get what, and you also have an accounting. So again, that's a little bit of a commercial. We use hometown ticketing and we're very happy at this point. Moving on to the playoffs. Can't wait. We'll get through a great season. Everything went well. We start the playoffs, the by-district and area games. Remember that the higher seed will be hosting on that. And when we get to the playoffs, we get to the regional, it'll be a neutral site agreed upon by both parties. It's important that whether one team or the other is hosting or it's a neutral site, that you know exactly what the protocols are at that particular location. They're agreed upon in advance. When you go to a neutral site, make sure that your host protocols are adhered to, as well as what both of you agree to. So communication is going to be huge. So as we work through the playoffs, I can't stress it enough, the importance of being on there, and also follow up with an email. So we have the verbal phone calls, and then we have something in writing. And if you've ever called the office, Robert and I are the worst. We'll send you something in writing so you can remember it and share it. Well, those things are very important. So make sure that you're on the same page. But again, getting to the playoffs is going to be very, like I said, it'll be challenging in a normal year. Brian?
I think one of the big concerns when you're in the playoff deals is if you're hosting the game, make sure you communicate all of your COVID protocols and what your expectations are for the fans and the teams, whether or not you're going to have a locker room, especially if it's a long distance commute, what you're going to be able to do as far as take a shower, go home. Those needs to be worked out ahead of time. When you're at the regional contest or at neutral site contest, you're adding a third party in there. So the facility of which you're leasing the field for the day, they may have more requirements than either of your teams, and you need to be as restrictive as the most restrictive there. So if your host says, hey, everybody has to wear a mask at all times, that's your choice whether you rent that facility or not. But if you rent that facility, do that. If you rent a facility that says, hey, we have no COVID protocols, we don't care what you do, then the TAPS rules will obviously become paramount. So just make sure that everybody's in communication to add one more step to your playoff planning and to your district planning as far as what you're going to do with COVID protocols this year.
And I'll go back. If it's your protocol that says that when we're on the field that we wear a mask while we're playing, you cannot put that on the other team. And come playoff time, that's going to be something you need to be ready to have a decision on, because again, you will dictate your school whether they wear a mask on the field but not your opponent. So just be aware of things. Nothing needs to sneak up on us. We need to be talking about things far out and be on the same page. Okay, Brian, talk about a topic we don't want to talk about, but that's stoppage of play.
So we were hoping, I think we all were, that last March, by the time we got to this January, COVID and the pandemic would have slowed down a little bit. We still continue to get cancellation of games and tournaments right now. We have schools that today are going into quarantine. So there is going to be a stoppage of play at some point in most regular seasons. So there's a difference between short-term and long-term. The short-term stoppage of play could be weather related, it could be COVID related, it could be whatever, but we can't play today. So my school had to go virtual because we had students who tested positive for COVID, and so we're going to be out for a week. So knowing that could happen, and be prepared for that. A longer term stoppage of play, and we have seen this, is you may have district opponents, and we got an email this morning from a school that basically said, we're done for right now. We don't know when we're going to come out of quarantine. We'll let you know. So they're not saying a week, they're not saying 10 days, they're not saying 14 days, they're saying it's open-ended. So if you get caught in that situation, please make sure that you're communicating to your districts and to your opponents, what your status is. They'd rather hear you say, I don't know, but I'm working on it, than to not hear anything from you at all. So if you cannot play a contest with a non-district opponent, the situation becomes you're not going to skip a district opponent. You're not going to redo schedules for district opponents to make up a non-district. So the rule of thumb that we've had, unless you can reschedule with that non-district opponent pretty quick, that one just goes away and we wipe that game off the map. TAPS games, district games take precedence over non-district games. By the time you get into a district season, you're going to have a situation where we want all games played if possible. Weather in an outdoor sport obviously plays enough havoc with us from Houston to Amarillo, and from Beaumont to El Paso and down the valley. We all have different weather concerns. So if you cannot play a contest or a district season, make sure that you're in touch with the TAPS office and with your district opponents. So what we have created, and we've used this all year, is a no contest. So if it is COVID related, you have a COVID positive or your COVID protocols say that you cannot go play, then that is not a contest. It is a no contest. It is not a forfeit. It is not a forfeiture. So if you're wrong pitcher, let's say you have a pitcher who has to go to the doctor and he's going to miss a game or whatever it happens to be, that's not COVID related. Find another pitcher and go ahead and play. If you don't play that game, it's a forfeit. However, if it's COVID related and you can't play because of a COVID positive or your COVID protocols, it's a no contest. Should that game be made up? Yes, if possible. But if it's not made up, then it just does not go into the district standings. That's all good at district. That's all good at non-district. But then when you get to the playoffs, that situation, there is no contest in the playoffs. So if your COVID protocols, and this did happen in volleyball, football, it'll happen in basketball and soccer. If you have a COVID positive test and your protocols say that you can't play as a result of that, then you're going to have to bail out of the playoffs at some point. People said, well, what would happen if it's in the Final Four? We would go to the next last loser and they would come back up and move forward, or we would go without and we'd have a hole in that situation. So again, no contest works until you get to the playoffs. Once you get to playoffs, our plan, our protocols that are in place say you would be out of the playoffs and the next team up would take their place.
Let's say we're getting down to that last couple of days before certification and that comes up at your school. Please let your district president and the TAPS office know that, because at that point before certification, we can put somebody else in and you can kind of shuffle what you're turning in and certifying as a district.
So we're going to finish up here in just a second, but here's the last word I want to give you on COVID. It's very important how you say what you're doing and mean what you say you're doing. So if your school is presently in session and you are in person, and as a preventative measure, your head of school or your school board says, we're going to go virtual for a week or 2 weeks. There's no positive testing cases. You really haven't hit a protocol reason to do that, but you're doing it as a prevention situation. Then yes, you could continue to practice and you could continue to play games as your school administration asks. However, if your administration is shutting down programs or your school as a result of COVID positive testing or an outbreak at your school, then no, you should not have practice and you should not have games. So just if you've got questions on that, please reach out to us. We'll make sure we can walk you through as much as possible. Robert, did we have any questions before we wrap up?
We have a couple. We'll catch them right quick. One is, where do I find scope training? That is in rank 1. You'll find everything you need there in rank 1. So if you're a baseball coach, make sure your AD has you in the system. And once you're in the system, you'll have the ability to log into your rank 1 account. And once you do that, you'll see a coach compliance area there, and that will direct you to all the information you need for all of your scope videos you need to watch and for signing your acknowledgement of rules.
Pretty well need to do that by February 1st, that first day of games. So you need to get that done as soon as possible. If you haven't done your coach certification and gone through all that, please make sure you do that as soon as possible.
We have one question about pitch counts. The pitch count form, do we fill that out for just district games or for all games? It's for all games, okay? All of our rules, TAPS rule, apply to all games, non-district games, district games, tournament games. All of our rules apply to all of those games. It is a health and safety issue. It applies across the board. It wouldn't make sense to track them just for part of the season and not have an accurate record of all those pitches for all your players and have that information available.
So let's look at the big yield sign and stop sign, Robert, and back up just a little bit. So all of our rules apply all year long, non-district, district, and postseason. So back to what Steve spoke about earlier, reporting your scores. You report all of your scores, tournament, non-tournament, district, non-district, playoff. They all go in your rank 1 account. They all go on your score stream account. All of your coaches, all your high school coaches, if they're coming in and giving catchers instruction, or they're coming in and working with pitchers, or they're working and coming in and working with batters, if they're a coach, they need to be in rank 1. They all need to do their scope certification. They all need to be approved and move forward. As you look at pitch counts, it's varsity and sub-varsity. It's all high school level competition, all high school level pitchers. Every game that they pitch throughout the season goes in there. So again, we're trying to help not only you track, we're also trying to help your opponent that may see that as we go through. It is health and safety, and the rest of that is taking care of TAPS. So our website is www.taps.biz. Our email, info@taps.biz, info@taps.biz, or drop us a phone call, 254-947-9268. 254-947-9268. It's a Central Texas phone number, but we're up here at the Texas Motor Speedway, ready, willing, and waiting to help and assist as you move forward. For those of you that are going to be in Grapevine tomorrow at the Texas High School Baseball Coaches Association, we look forward to seeing you there, continuing discussion. Or if you have thoughts, concerns, or ideas that we need to know about, please let us know that as well. And I'll give you one last word. We do really appreciate what's going on with all of our media partners. So if you have not only the newspaper, but Lone Star Christian Sports Network, if you have Texas High School Baseball, make sure that you're reporting scores. If they send you a questionnaire, get that out to them. If there's a poll or whatever, they're looking at your scores as well. So we got a lot of folks behind the scenes trying to help you promote your school, promote your program, and promote your kids. Ultimately, our job is to promote TAPS, but we look forward to all of us working in unison together. So again, thank you for joining us here today. Thank you for being a part of TAPS. Thank you for being a part of TAPS baseball. And we look forward to seeing the championships in May and everybody that can be there for the All-State selection meeting, celebrating a great spring as we work our way through this pandemic time. John, closing remarks from you, or are we good to go?
No, we're good. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Steve and Will in the office. Folks, once again, if you have any questions or if we didn't get to it, please send us an email, info@taps.biz. This recording will be made available later this afternoon. You will get an email to the same account that you used to register for today's webinar with a link to that recording. And it will also be on our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/tapsbiz. Thank you, folks, and enjoy the rest of your day.